Okay, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I do not believe there's any agenda updates at this time. With that, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Red? Mr. Salgado? Mr. Schultz? Here. Mr. Tassoni? Present. Mr. Webster? Here. Mr. Westcott? Present. Mr. Arena? Mr. Billich? Mr. Booker?
Present.
Mr. Boomer?
Here.
Mr. Butita?
Here.
Mrs. Crosby?
Here.
Mr. Fellers?
Here.
Mr. Fiducia?
Here.
Mr. Gurl?
Present.
Mrs. Gorel? Mr. Hoffman?
Present.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. McDonald?
Present.
Mr. Neighbors?
Here.
3 absent, 17 present, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much, Clerk Gama. With that, I will ask everybody to stand. I'm going to turn things over to Mr. Hoffman for the invocation and pledge. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, dear Lord, for all the gifts that you give us and the wisdom you provide for us at times in this meeting. I want to be thankful for all the fact that we have grown together again as a board, and we seem to be working much better. And I appreciate your help in that. And please take care of our troops, our first responders, and take care of those people that are getting the coronavirus, and take care of all of us. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hoffman. With that, I'll move to our next item of business, which will be public comment. We have 3 speakers this evening. Julie, are you here? Julie, come on up. Julie Basma from RAMP is here this evening, and she's going to come right up over on this side. And as Julie's coming up, I'm going to read our little disclaimer. Comments shall be limited to 3 minutes. Speakers may not address zoning matter which is pending before the ZBA, zoning committee, or county board. Personnel matters pending or threatening litigation may not be addressed in open session. An individual may speak a maximum of 3 times per calendar year on the same topic. This prohibition shall include the repetition of the same topic in a statement of what is purported to be a different topic. Personal attacks or inappropriate language of any sort will not be tolerated. With that, I will thank you for coming, Julie, and we'll turn it over to you.
A little odd because I know we're on the agenda for something else, but this has to do with the half-a-cent tax for mental health, and just wanting to advocate for the board members that are up. I've known Marianne Abadi, well, as the director of RAMP. We serve individuals with disabilities, and of course, a large percentage are individuals with mental health issues. I've interacted with Marianne for probably 3 decades. When she worked at Janet Waddles, we worked a lot, and then even as she transitioned to Rosecrans. So we had nothing but positive experiences with her, whether it was working with consumers or even some of our staff who had mental health issues. As well as Linda Sandquist. I've worked with her at the Community Foundation, and very helpful, a person that just steps up and is accountable for all that she does and follows through. Also, Dick Kunert, knew him for years as he worked at Singer Mental Health Center, and he has just been such an advocate for individuals with mental illness, and we've learned a lot from him over the years. Again, just can't say enough good for him, about him. And then Wendy Larson, I know through the Carrie Lynn Center and the advocacy she has done for children who have been physically, sexually, and emotionally abused. So I think it's a great slate of folks and people to stand behind the mental health, this new board, and to advocate for the way the monies are spent. I would give them my full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Our next speaker is Pam Clark-Reidenbach from the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence. Thank you again, Julie.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I am Pam Clark-Reidenbach. I'm the Executive Director of the Northern Illinois Center for Nonprofit Excellence, more fondly known as NICNE. Our role in the community is to promote innovation and excellence in the nonprofit sector to impact social change. We serve over 1,500 individuals from more than 220 nonprofits in 17 counties, but most of the individuals, our customers, come from Winnebago County. We also lead a system of change initiative. One of those initiatives is the Youth Mental Health System of Change, where we are working with multiple community partners to create a comprehensive, coordinated system of care addressing the needs of our community's children and adolescents. As part of our work, research was conducted by Northern Illinois University, the Center for Governmental Studies, that identified critical areas of needed improvements in the children's mental health care system that could be addressed if we passed the sales tax. The need for funding mental health and substance abuse is clear because the issues impact all of us. If we don't take care of the people in need now, we will pay much more later through ER visits, police and court system involvement, lost productivity, and human cost to families. We are the largest urban area in Illinois that has no local funding for mental health or addiction services. So I want to say thank you to the county board for allowing a vote on a sales tax for mental health and addiction services. That decision shows tremendous understanding, compassion, and innovation. But today, we are before you to support the recommendations of the candidates for the Community Mental Health Board. These individuals have been carefully selected and are considered among the most educated, informed, and experienced individuals in the areas of mental health, substance abuse, and human services. I have worked alongside several of the individuals being recommended. They are truly advocates for the mentally ill and people struggling with substance abuse. They are tremendously knowledgeable with decades of experience. Their backgrounds are strong and diverse yet complementary. I'm confident these individuals will uphold the responsibilities bestowed upon them with honor, professionalism, and fairness. I respectfully request that you approve the individuals being recommended. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam. And our last speaker is Paul Logley from the United Way regarding the mental health appointees.
Good evening. This has been an unusual couple of months. I think I've spent more time addressing the county board now than I did in 21 years as your state's attorney. And then I would get up here and argue with you. I don't have to do that anymore. I'm up here mostly to express gratitude. First off, I am Paul Oakley, CEO of United Way, Rock River Valley, and a member of the Mental Health Committee, which is a part of the Rockford Regional Health Council. I'm here mostly to express gratitude. One, again, thank you for getting this matter before the voters on March 17th. Giving the voters a choice is always the best decision. Thank you for passing a resolution that establishes a community mental health board. It may not be perfect, but it's manageable. It's going to lay a good groundwork for what we're going to do moving forward if this referendum passes. And I know that I believe in the next week or two you're going to see some recommendations for what could be done, a minor change of that resolution that may be coming in front of a county board committee in the next week or so. I hope you give that consideration. The state's attorney's office will be recommending that, and I commend them for doing that. I also want to join in support for the nominees that have been advanced by the chairman and are awaiting the consent of the county board. I've been around this community a long time, and I know the people that are being nominated. Mariana Abadi, retired from Rosecrans, knows the mental health landscape. She's going to be a tremendous asset to that board. Linda Sandquist serves as my vice president at the United Way, and before that she was with the Community Foundation. She understands the workings of social service agencies and how money can best be used to advance the cause of a healthy community. Tim Neighbors, a member of your own board, who personally suffered a loss in his family that due to mental illness, a loss that did not have to occur. Terry Giardini, a 35-year educator and a psychologist, would be an excellent addition to the board. Dick Cunnert, the former superintendent of the Singer Zone Center. As a assistant prosecutor, I handled the petitions for mental health at the court out at Singer Zone Center. And then later, as a judge, I presided over the cases where people were being petitioned for mental health services after being brought in there most of the time by law enforcement. The facility responded well, did a great job with the people who needed the help, and that was a reflection of Dick Cunard's competence and dedication to the cause of mental health in our community. Danielle Angelari is the head of the NAMI of Northern Illinois. She was recognized as one of the 40 under 40. She's a true leader in the community. Wendy Larson, I hired Wendy in the state's attorney's office, a great assistant state's attorney, now retired. I can't believe I hired somebody, now they're retired and I'm not. It just doesn't make sense. But Wendy will be a great addition to the board. She understands the mental health issues that occur in the criminal courts of this county every day. What a tremendous asset for the mental health board.
Mr. Logley, I know this is going to be hard to believe, but
I
you've hit
dare
your
you.
3 minutes.
I dare you. And Julie Morris is also good. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Logley. I'm sure that's never happened before. Thank you again to our speakers. With that, we'll move on to our next item of business, board member correspondence. Any board member comments this evening? Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you. I've met recently, twice now, with the folks out in New Milford that are impacted by the nuisances of the landfill out there, mainly the odors and everything going along with it. So at any rate, they've asked me, they're very frustrated, and I understand why. And they're passionate about getting something done out there. I understand why. And they seems as though they've turned every stone to get some results, some resolution to their problems. They're hurting and they need help. So once again, I asked them what more, because we've explained that that is under the watch of the state mainly. And so when they were here and spoke one time to us, and Justin Zog spoke, and he read a statement that is part of the landfill agreement there, and it's what we would call our boilerplate statement, that it says it will, all things will be under the federal, state, local guidelines and so forth. And they are assuming that there's something that the county can do by way of that definition, by way of that statement. So I said, once again, I would bring that statement to the state's attorney's office, which I did, and I'm asking our state's attorney to respond to that. I've sat down with the state attorney's office and explained to him. So I'm hoping our state's attorney's going to respond to that. For the record, I don't know if any of the landfill, those people are here, but I want it to be on the record so they can hear this once again, and then where the lawsuit stands with the Attorney General's office on this. Thank you.
Marilyn, anything? Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the language that Mr. Webster is referring to is the language that's put in all contracts, because when you're making a contract with another entity, you want to ensure that they are not doing anything illegal. So that is standard language. Having said that, with respect to the landfill, the only individual who has the authority to revoke the license is where the licensure originated, and that is with the Illinois EPA office. So they license the landfill. Any complaints or violations, the jurisdiction lies with the state of Illinois through their legal counsel, which is Kwame Raoul, the current Attorney General. So the Attorney General is the only one who has the authority to enforce violations of state statute regarding the landfill. And that is through basic legislation. Legally, it's called preemption, which means that the local level government, the Winnebago County State Attorney's Office, has no authority to go into court to file a violation under violation of the Illinois EPA laws. That lies specifically with the Attorney General's office. They have filed a 10-count complaint. That complaint is available to the public. They have alleged numerous violations going back to 2015. That complaint is available for any of the residents who want to view it. That complaint specifically outlines complaints of those residents that were given to the Attorney General's office, and that is the basis of the lawsuit that they currently have pending against the landfill. There have been orders entered. One of the complaints that was recently amended indicates failure to comply with prior orders. I know sometimes it's difficult for lay people who do not work in law to understand the due process, but this is what procedure is. It's due process. Once the state licenses an entity, that entity is entitled to due process before the state can revoke their licensure. It's no different than when you have a driver's license that's revoked by the Secretary of State. You're entitled to a hearing, try to see if it should in fact be revoked. The wheels within the criminal justice system or the civil justice system sometimes turn slowly, but they do turn, and the process is going forward. And again, the Attorney General's lawsuit regarding violations, when I read through, the current complaint goes back to 2015. So that's about 5 years. So those residents have not gone unheard, and I understand their frustration, but the process is following through the court system currently by the legal representative who has authority to file the complaint against the landfill, who has done so, and that is Attorney General Kwame Raoul.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and if they are not here in person, I don't know if they are or not, but I hope that they hear your words. They can, they're watching this electronically, or they can look at it on the website and see that, because it's difficult when you're in a state where you can't, there's nothing you can do, and you've reached out to every entity, every body, every person that you can, including the health department. They're reaching. They want some kind of resolution to this problem, and I really feel bad for those people down there, and I hope that we can get something done for them, because what they talked to me about when I met them, one of the things they say is now you were going for sales or a tax for mental health. And they're saying, what about our physical health? And so it's good that you're going to do something for mental health, they're saying, but we're still out here languishing with our mental health. So thank you.
Well, and if I could just add, that case is next up on March 26th at 9 a.m. For status. And with respect to the physical health, I mean, the complaints allege a violation of air pollution, for example, failure to cover refuse and end at each operation, failure to operate collection and control systems to prevent malodor. So they are addressing all of the complaints that the residents have, and it is a 10-count complaint that has been filed by the Attorney General's office. It's a public hearing, it's a public document, and it's open. All hearings are open to the public.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Mr. Webster. One action item that came out of the last hearing, and maybe the state's attorney wants to jump in. I know Charlotte was there with Chris Grant from the AG's office, but the only agreement that doesn't end the lawsuit whatsoever, but it was a side agreement, was that the landfill agreed with the AG to hire a consultant that they would pay for to evaluate the situation. The landfill pays the bill, but the consultant is under the direction and control of the AG. So that was the only thing that came out of that. Is that anything you want to add to that?
No, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Webster? That's it. Any other board member comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to Chairman's report. Just a quick item. This was announced in a press conference, I believe, today in another community. But the Fair Maps discussion in the state of Illinois is going to be recirculated. We have until May 3rd for our state legislators to put that on, to allow for that to be on the ballot, so that voters in November have an opportunity to take politicians out of the map drawing in the state. This is something that, when polled, it's probably the most popular thing when you ask voters of a change they want. It is critical we get that on the ballot, and there's going to be more information throughout the state and in discussions coming up on that. One thing I do want to mention as well, tonight we're going to read in for first reading the nominations for the recommendations on the Mental Health Board. There is one specific name I do need to add to the list under the MD appointment. We did not have a confirmation when we went to print the agenda, but I will spend a little bit of time talking about the MD appointment when we get there this evening. As I've been reminded by the state's attorney and Dr. Martell agree, is that the board itself of 7 does need to be seated, meaning approved by this board, and then there would be a discussion about at-large appointments. So it's a one-step, two-step, and so the for the first reading is the 7, and I do have the 7th name. I'll get into a little more detail when we get to that part of the agenda. With that, announcements, I'll move on to our next item, announcements and communications. Clerk Gamow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
I do have, and I've never had a specific question in the meeting, but I did get a call, and I don't have a specific, but there was a call about a water test that is listed in this particular thing. Is there any specifics anybody could talk to on? I got a call without specifics that there's something in the packet related to a water test, and the question was that germane to the landfill? Was that just a routine process water test? I don't know if anybody on staff or, okay. Take a quick look at that. It's not that it would change, I don't know that it would change anything, but just for disclosure purposes. And I couldn't answer that earlier today, and that's something we'll just provide an update when we get that clarified. So my apologies that that wasn't buttoned up. We'll go ahead and place those items on file, and then we'll move on to our next item on the agenda, the consent agenda. May I please have a motion on the raffle report, the approval of the January 9 minutes, and the layover of the January 23rd minutes? I have a motion by Mrs. Crosby, a second by Mr. Fellers and Mr. Hoffman. Thank you. Consent agenda with those 3 items is now before the board for discussion or comment. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, County Administrator's Report. Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 items to brief the board on. One is last week we did meet with representatives from Spirit Financial, who are our financial advisors, talking about the upcoming bond sale. We also talked about possible refundings that we could do based on the interest rates, and we actually came up with one that we'll be presenting to the Finance Committee at the meeting next week. We also talked about some options, limited options in terms of funding, financing, et cetera, for capital items, and we'll also be talking to the Finance Committee about those items next week. Second item is, in conjunction with that, we are meeting with the department heads next week to kind of get an update on their needs, capital needs, items they really need as opposed to what they would like. We're going to leave the highway department out of that for now. We've already had discussions with them, and we're already moving forward with the bond issue for that, but hopefully we'll get some good discussion and also talk to them about financing from their side as far as monies that they can come forward with, as opposed to the county having to issue debt or so on. So that's all I have.
Is there any, thank you very much, Steve. Is there any update on the PSB at this time?
We're actually, talked to Chairman McDonald, and we're actually scheduling hopefully a meeting on the 25th of February, bringing the consultant back to discuss options and so on.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any, moving on from County Administrator's report, is there any other items that you had, Steve, and/or need department?
No, I would like, Mr. Lewandowski has an item under department head reports.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you guys for supporting Memorial Hall. It's an honor for me to work there. Since 1903, Memorial Hall was dedicated to honor the veterans of Winnebago County. One way we do that in recent years is to provide a program for Black History Month. And this year is no exception. It's our 12th year of doing such a program, and the second year that we've changed it up and we've partnered with Harlem High School and the students there. They do a wonderful job with their Veterans History Project. So what we do is we get some local veterans. We show a clip from their interview in the as part of the Harlem Project. We have the student there and the veteran there. The student actually picks the clip, and then we have a discussion about it. This year, in honor of the 19th Amendment, we focused on women veterans, African American veterans. So we have 3 local female Black veterans that are part of our program. We're going to have the state's attorney talk about the 19th Amendment at the event. It's this Saturday, the 15th, from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. I'd like you all to be there. One other thing that happened was on Tuesday morning, Congresswoman Bustoff spoke for 4 minutes on the House floor about this event and about our veterans. So I'm really proud that we're getting out there nationally. This event is a great thing, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for all your hard work. Any other department head updates? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. And the first item, under new business, is the Community Mental Health Board. I guess it's worth noting no compensation for this board. So tonight we're reading in seven appointments that then will go to that are before the board for first reading and then eventual approval. Mariana Body, Tim Neighbors, board member Tim Neighbors, Dr. Terry Giardini, Dick Kunert, Danielle Angelieri, and then I posted MD appointment. One of the criteria is to have a medical doctor be part of this, and at the recommendation of the Medical Society, talking some to their people today, they did not have somebody inside their office or on the Medical Society board. They recommended going within the larger medical community. And I did have a conversation with Dr. Bill Gorski, the former CEO of Swedes, and he is very interested, if approved by the board, in serving as the MD appointment on this initial slate. And so I did not have that when we posted the agenda. I did not have that even as of this morning confirmed. I will get you Dr. Gorski's resume tonight, if at all possible, if not tomorrow morning. But I think for those of you who have paid attention, obviously he ran one of the 3 hospitals in this region for a very long time and has been involved in a number of community discussions. Just a little bit about the process. I believe it was in October or November that Dr. Martell brought forward the Mental Health Board for consideration, and I believe that board was approved unanimously by the board to create and establish the board. At that time, I believe she made a call for folks who are interested to come forward and engage. About a month later, there was the discussion separately, not that there isn't tie-in, but separately about the mental health sales tax. And at that time, when that passed by this board, I did remind folks, if you have any ideas or thoughts, please, let's talk. A number of you have engaged, and we've had serious discussions about potential options. It's no different than with Mr. Neighbors' appointment. He's going to do a great job on this board. I know you all agree, but that doesn't mean there's not other board members on this board that would also do a great job. And so when you look at these candidates, each of them, I believe, will do a fantastic job. That's not to say that we're not blessed as a community to have maybe more than one good option. And I think we're blessed to have that, but the people before you are very serious players in this discussion. One thing that has been brought to my attention, albeit at kind of the last minute, is that we do need to go back to Mr. McDonald, separate from this discussion, go back to Mr. McDonald's Operation Committee, and the question about the appointment categories has come up in a couple of the categories. Regional Office of Education, I believe the spirit of it was intended one way, but a literal interpretation. We may want to make a tweak that gives us just a little bit of elbow room so that we're in a position to put the very best team on the field, so to speak. And we'll get into that. I believe there was some communication about having that discussion, but it would be a one-word change, I believe, on the resolution that established this board. That would, for example, with the Regional Office of Education, would not limit us to having somebody inside the regional office, which is a teeny office. It would allow us to get an educator and have a slightly larger net in which to cast. And the educator appointment recommendation I'm putting before the board is Dr. Terry Giardini. He is a 35-year teaching veteran with a PhD in clinical psychology. He serves on the sheriff's hostage negotiation team, and he serves, I believe, has or does serve related to the deferred prosecution panel. Maybe that's a distant service, but one that he has been involved in. Then under, eventually when we get to the at-large appointment, there's another education-related person. She is probably the leading trauma-informed schools leader, and one of them in the region, if not the state, and that's Dr. Julie Morris, the Harlem superintendent. Her name, when talked about and comes up, she is leading the discussion on trauma-informed schools, even well outside this community and around the state. So a one-word change on our resolution that the board passed gives us the room to have a guy like Dr. Terry Giardini and not be confined to an office of a few people. Similarly, when you look at the medical society appointment, it is very narrowly written in the resolution where we would have to get somebody perhaps in the Medical Society Association office, and they have deferred and recommended that would be in our best interest to get somebody from the larger medical community, and I'm sure you will agree that Dr. Bill Gorski would be somebody that would look good on any board in this region, especially one focused on mental health. So I know that's a couple of different conversations, but tonight that is being read in for first reading are the 7 appointments, including Dr. Gorski as the MD appointment, and I will get you his resume in short order. And I would open that up if there's any questions or comments related to these 7. We will deal with the at-large conversations. Hopefully at the next board meeting, we'll be ready to entertain that discussion. There's been some very productive discussions. I want to thank board members, several of which have given considerable feedback in this process. Any discussions, comments, reactions, concerns, things you like, don't like, questions about the next steps? Okay, with that, thank you very much, everybody. And we will move on to our next item of business, and that is the Crime Commission Board. At the recommendation of their board at the Crime Commission, and at my recommendation as well, the appointment of Tiana McCall, filling the expired term of Ken Burns, which would go from 2020 to 2023, and that is in for a first reading as well. Any comments, questions on that? Seeing none, thank you very much. We'll move on to our next item of business, which would be standing committees. Finance Committee, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee has 19 items tonight. First of all, I would take items 3 through 16 and lay those over. Those are ordinances for abatement, so those are to be read in. So I'd like to read in 13 through 16, which are the tax abatements that we do, our ordinance for that. So those are justify the first reading and lay it over.
And just to clarify, 3 through 16, okay.
That's correct.
Okay,
So,
we've laid those over. Thank
right,
you.
thank you. Next item is Budget Amendment 2020-014, Miscellaneous County Sheriff's Department Computers. to be labeled over, and I'd like to motion to suspend the rules and vote on this today.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado to suspend the rules, which would allow us to vote this evening. Second by Mr. Hoffman. Mrs. Crosby, thank you very much. The question is to suspend the rules, which would allow us to separately vote this evening. Any questions by board members? All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We've suspended the rules. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to approve Budget Amendment 2020-014, miscellaneous county sheriff's department computers, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on Budget Amendment 2020-014, miscellaneous county and sheriff's department computers. Second by Mr. Westcott. Mr. Hoffman, thank you. Item is now before the board for any questions or discussion. Yes, sir. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple quick questions for the finance chair. The capital lease payment reduction from Starcom, just could you explain that briefly?
Mr. Chapman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What that is, originally in this year's budget, the entire payment was budgeted to a general fund department, miscellaneous county, and really a portion of that should be allocated to the 911 budget, because a portion of that Starcom project dealt with councils and so on that would normally be paid for by the 911 budget. So all we're doing is allocating that budget over to for this particular project, that the actual payment will get paid out of 911. So.
Okay, and then one other question. In comparing to the last budget amendment, this one, it's the account which we're moving the funds into is the data processing equipment budget, 46586. But the last budget amendment, it was listed under the other departmental equipment, 46440. Just any reason for the difference in the line items on there, and does that affect?
No,
how it
not
can be
really.
spent?
It doesn't affect it. It's all in the capital, so we're okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fellers. Any other follow-up questions? Seeing none, the item again is item 2, Budget Amendment 2020-014, County and Sheriff's Department computers. Seeing no more questions, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? We have a unanimous vote and on item 2, and the motion has carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute a grant subaward agreement between Regional 1 Planning Council and the Winnebago County Administration 2020 census. I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on the execution of a grant sub-award agreement between R1 and the county. May I have a second, please? Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Fellers, thank you very much. Item is now before the board for discussion and questions. Any questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next item of business, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next item is Budget Amendment 2020-012, the Juvenile Detention Home. It's to be laid over, but I would like to motion to suspend the rules and vote on this today.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on item 19, Budget Amendment 2020-012, Juvenile Detention Home, funding for replacement of the roof. Second by Mr. Hoffman. Thank you very much. Again, talking about suspending the rules, yes vote suspends. No vote does not. So any questions? All those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We've suspended the rules. Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to approve Budget Amendment 2020-012, Juvenile Detention Home, funding for the replacement of the roof.
We have a motion by Mr. Salgado on the budget amendment related to the juvenile detention roof replacement. Second by Mr. Hoffman. Thank you. Any discussion by board members? Yes, sir, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question. Was not previously budgeted, so this is additional fund is coming out of the general fund to pay for this, is that correct?
No, it is coming out of the detention home fund balance.
The detention home fund balance?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
This is a balance that is set aside for?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our last item is Budget Amendment 2020-013, 2018 IMRF pension bonds to be laid over, but I motion to suspend the rules. And
Got a motion by Mr. Salgado to suspend the rules on Budget Amendment 2020-013 IMRF pension bonds. May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Fellers. Any discussion on suspending the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor of suspending the rules signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? We have suspended the rules unanimously. Mr. Salgado.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to approve Budget Amendment 2020-013, 2018 IMRF pension bonds.
We got a motion by Mr. Salgado on Budget Amendment 2020-013 IMRF pension bonds. May I have a second, please? Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Hoffman, thank you both. And item is now before the board for questions or discussion. Any questions or discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to echo what Mr. Chapman has mentioned about, or they're going to be talking about the capital projects with the different departments, and we'll have discussions as well with Spear Financial on that. More to come on that, and hopefully we can start gathering that information to see what's really needed out there and what our plan is for the future for that. So more to come on that, and I appreciate, and hopefully you guys can attend at least to talk a little bit about the Spear Financial and our bonds and everything like that. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salgado. Our next committee is the Economic Development Committee, and I believe pinch hitting for Mr. Billick is Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our first resolution, the committee has 3 resolutions tonight. The first resolution is a grant of $35,000 to the Regional Access and Mobilization Project, Inc., which is RAMP, to assist with renovating their facilities. And I so move.
Got a motion by Mrs. Red on the resolution related to $35,000 for the ramp capital project. I have a second, Mr. Westcott. Thank you very much. Mr. Neighbors and Mr. Fellers, thank you. The item is now before the board for discussion and questions. Any discussion or questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Please note, Mr. Schultz is a no vote. All other members that are present cast a yes vote. Motion passes. Thank you very much, Mrs. Red.
Our second resolution is a granting authority to the Winnebago County Chairman to execute the documents necessary to complete a loan for $100,000 from the revolving loan fund to Accelerated Machine Design and Engineering, LLC, and I so move.
Got a motion by Mrs. Red on the resolution related to the revolving loan, $100,000 revolving loan related to Accelerated Machine Design and Engineering. And may I have a second, please? Thank you, Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Neighbors, and Mr. Westcott. Item is now before the board for discussion and questions. Any discussion and questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mrs. Red.
And our last resolution is approving $20,000 from the host fee to county board members to support nonprofit organization for fiscal year 2020, and I so move.
Motion by Mrs. Red on the resolution appropriating $20,000, which would be $1,000 per board member of host fees to nonprofit organizations for fiscal year 2020. May I have a second, please? Second by Mr. Neighbors and Mr. Fellers. Thank you. Any discussion or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion, no vote by Mr. Schultz. We'll cast a yes vote for all of the members present. Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mrs. Red.
That concludes our report.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Red. Next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Operations Committee has got one resolution for this evening. It's a resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental cooperation agreement among the County of Winnebago, Illinois, the City of Loves Park, the Village of McChesney Park, the Village of Cherry Valley, the Village of Durand, the Village of Pecatonica, the Village of Rockton, the Village of Roscoe, the City of South Beloit, and the Village of Winnebago, and I so move.
We have a motion by Mr. McDonald on the 911 agreement between, with the county and the municipal partners. May I have a second, please? A second by Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Booker, Mr. Westcott, I think Mr. Boomer, and Mr. Salgado. I think we'll be okay here. Any discussion or questions by board members? Yes, sir, Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank all the municipalities, Mr. Eubanks, Mr. Anderson, Mr. Jury, and obviously Mr. Kalinkas and the attorneys that it's been 2 long years on this, and I'm appreciative. Hopefully the county board can move forward and we can get those signed. So I do kudos to them for doing all the hard work, and I know it's been 2 years, long years on that aspect of it. So I'm glad that this is off the checklist. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Any other questions, comments? I'll just ask, because I know there was some tweaks today. What were some of the small tweaks, if I could ask Mr. Kurlinkus here, that changed between the last version and this version, so it's clear?
I'm going to stand up because my chair is sinking into the sunset. There were several that were made, and there were questions and comments that came up at last week's committee meeting. The Loves Park currently, I think the board knows, Loves Park currently is paying for 911 dispatch under a separate agreement. They wanted some language changed on that. We had addressed some issues regarding when the agreement could be terminated by municipalities. That was the last change that came through late this afternoon. So there were a couple of things that had to do with clarity on the appointment of different members of the committee from the sheriff's department, from the county administrator, of course, being an ex officio non-voting member. So those were basically what we changed from the last presentation of the joint committees a week ago tonight to what we have today. It's substantially the same. Had to do with the payment, the starting. I mean, that's what some of the items that Mr. Salgado pointed out took a long time to negotiate through. But I think everybody realizes from speaking with the municipal representatives that the outcome is a fair agreement. It's one that'll be obviously re-examined in the future, but I think it gets us going and gets the payments to the county, the contributions from the municipal organizations, and I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you, Dave. Anything you care to add, Mr. McDonald? The only thing I would say, and thank the group and the partners, when this began, it was very clear we did not have equity in payment across Winnebago County around 911, and I think going forward we certainly do, and that's not a small deal. The fact that the sheriff has control of the day-to-day operations, I think, is a key component. And my understanding as well is that there will be advisory input by the partners, which seems fair if they're now paying. And I think that we've addressed a legacy issue that's been longstanding, and I appreciate everybody's efforts. So thank you to everybody, Mr. McDonald and company and State's Attorney's Office as well. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, the item before is the 911 agreement with the county and the municipal partners. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald.
I don't ever want that back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just 2 quick things. I spoke with Mr. Chapman a little bit ago. Next week we'll have a joint committee so we can review the closed session minutes so that we can pass them the following board meeting and get those out and released hopefully. And another thing Mr. Chapman alluded to is the 25th of February. It's a Tuesday night. It's not typical for Operations Committee, but that is the night that we're going to meet with the Public Safety building and get an update on that. I would encourage anybody else on the board that would like that update to also attend. It's too early to tell where we'll hold it, Mr. Chapman, I think, but again, it's the 25th. It's on a Tuesday night. It's not a typical night for operations, so please, members, put it on your calendar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Public Safety Committee has two items. One is, number one will be an ordinance prohibiting the establishment of cannabis dispensing organizations within unincorporated Winnebago County, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Booker on an ordinance related to prohibiting the establishment of cannabis dispensing organizations within unincorporated Winnebago County. Second by Mr. Fellers and Mr. Butita. Item is now before the board. Again, the item is whether or not to prohibit the establishment of cannabis dispensing organizations. Any questions or comments? Mr. Fellers, then Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to provide some clarification, there are a number of uses under the state statute for adult use cannabis in the counties, including craft growers, cultivation centers, dispensing organizations, infusing organizations, processing organizations, and transportation organizations. What came out of committee that we are simply in this only prohibiting the dispensing organizations, so that would be the dispensary in the areas. It still permits farmers, if they choose to grow, if they can get a license to grow. Transportation companies and infusing companies continue to work. This only prohibits actual dispensaries in the unincorporated parts of the county.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions or comments yet? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one hardship I have with this ordinance is that this board, this county, we're willing to accept the revenues that come through the state in way of sales tax, and we voted in favor of, and I believe it was an additional 3% tax that we could receive from municipalities within the county that allow the sale. And I just think it's hypocritical for us to say we want everyone else's tax money, but we don't want it in our own backyard. And I look at it as though this was the legislation from the governor's office was to allow for some that were deprived in certain ways and in certain areas of the community to maybe improve themselves and get back and make some revenue. And I look at least the far west side, which is a portion of my district, that there may be some vacant properties or businesses or land or building over there that maybe someone would want to do this activity. And I wouldn't support this because I just think that shame on us. If we're willing to accept the tax money from other municipalities, we should allow it as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni. Follow-up by Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just to respond, Mr. Tassoni, this was certainly part of the conversation that we had in the Public Safety Committee. The idea was that if you look at the economic zones, they were, I believe, exclusive to within the city of Rockford. There weren't any unincorporated parts of that included in that economic zone. Likewise, this is less about, prohibiting within the county and being hypocritical, but more wanting to respect any of our municipal partners out in the rural areas that might choose not to allow it, say, Pecatonica, Winnebago, et cetera. They could, theoretically, those are smaller communities and someone could just set up a dispensing organization right outside those regions, those municipalities, and therefore bypass, the municipal will or the will of the people of that municipality. The other part of it is, if you think, unless you're on the I-90, I-39 corridor in this area, this is a fairly rural county. And one of the parts of the dispensing organizations is that they are also would allow for lounges, similar to cigar lounges, where someone could imbibe on premise, could imbibe on presence. And given the large rural nature of our county, I think we in public safety agreed that we did not want people consuming cannabis at a dispensary out in one of the rural parts or unincorporated parts of the county, then theoretically getting in a vehicle and driving to their next destination. So that this is, just a good balance between, what we think our municipal partners might want, what is good for the county, and what is, ultimately keeps people safe.
Thank you, Mr. Fellers, and a response by Mr. Tassoni.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on that, as you said, Mr. Fellers, to try to prohibit someone from setting up across the street from a village or municipality, the city of Rockford's allowing it. They could literally set up across the street from unincorporated county and do the same. I think it's just some feel-good stuff that just appeases to a small group of people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tassoni. Any other comments or questions? Oh, Mr. Booker.
And just real quickly, I feel that it would also add on to the list of duties of our already depleted sheriff's department. They've got enough on their plate right now as it is, so just wanted to throw that in as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Booker. Any other questions or comments by board members? I'm going to ask the clerk to call the roll with the reminder that a yes vote prohibits the establishment of cannabis dispensing organizations. A yes vote prohibits, a no vote does not. Clerk Gamau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Salgado? Yes. Mr. Schultz? Yes. Mr. Tassoni?
No.
Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster has left the building. Mr. Westcott? No. Mr. Billich? No. Now in the building. Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? No. Mr. Butita?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby?
Yes.
Mr. Fellers?
Pass.
I'm sorry?
Pass.
Pass. Mr. Fiducia?
No.
Mr. Girl? He has left the building. Mr. Hoffman? Mr. Kelly?
No.
Mr. McDonald?
No.
Mr. Neighbors? No. Mrs. Red?
No.
Go back to Mr. Fellers?
No.
None? 10 noes, 5 yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Motion fails. Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to reconsider and enter on the minutes the previously disposed of motion authorize or prohibiting dispensing units in Winnebago County. I need a second.
So we have a motion to,
Reconsider and enter on the minutes the previously disposed of motion.
a motion to reconsider
And enter on the minutes.
and enter onto the minutes. Okay.
Previously, thank you.
Previously dispensed motion, and we have a second. Okay, so then is this something that we would take a vote on, or?
All action has been suspended on this. It is up for reconsideration at the next board meeting. There are now 5 members that are absent, and therefore we can now take it up with 20 members present in 2 weeks.
So you're digging a couple chapters into the Robert's Rules of Order.
I am.
Okay, and so with that, I would just want to take a look to my left to make sure procedurally that we're okay. I'm not sure what chapter that came from Robert's Rules, but
I can give it to you if you'd like.
personally, I'm okay with this. I believe it's accurate from everything I understand, but if there's something that suggests otherwise, but if not, then I am fine with the motion and the second and will allow it. The question becomes, if just a motion and a second is all that is needed procedurally, is also in question.
That is correct.
I'm sorry, Mr. Boomer, I just want to understand what you said. Mr. Boomer, right here.
It does not.
Pardon
like clarification by the state's attorney.
Yep, we're working on it. Unless there's something that could be brought to my attention that says this is an action that's should be not allowed, then I need to allow that. I don't have any reason to believe that's untrue, but if there's somebody that can point to something that suggests this was an improper act or something we cannot do based on Robert's rules, then I need to know that. So then as they take a quick look, what we're suggesting is if this would go forward, the motion and the second bring this back for a vote. It would be back before the board in 2 weeks.
To clarify, it would come up via old business. The board member could bring this up for reconsideration. It may not be amended. It can be debated, but it would be basically the idea is that when there are large board members present, and it's an important issue, it's a way of making sure the entire board is capable of weighing in on an important topic.
So the item is that it just takes a motion and a second. There's no further action that would be taken.
That is correct.
So number one, I'm going under the belief we can do it. Number two, that the proper way to do it is a simple motion and second. And if there's nothing to dispute that, and I don't mean, okay, there's nothing that we can dispute this action on. And so what we will do is plan on bringing this back under new business or under old business in 2 weeks. So yes, sir, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if, I'm just asking the question, is it appropriate to have discussion on the motion and second on that matter?
It's non-debatable.
No, I'm not asking for a debate. I'm just asking if there's a discussion period, or should I take it up with unfinished business?
You could take it up under unfinished business, and I in no way am I trying to cut you off, but
No, I'm just asking
procedurally.
for clarification on that. Thank you.
Point of order, it cannot be brought up at this meeting. It has to be brought up at
Okay.
the next scheduled meeting.
So further debate on this topic comes up at the next meeting. What I will do under unfinished business, if Mr. Tassoni has something he would like to share in general terms, not to revisit this issue, but to offer his thoughts on this issue, I'm going to give him a little bit of room because this is a new item, and I'm trying to be fair that people on both sides of this are heard. And I'm attempting to do the right thing on this, so I'd appreciate a little grace on both sides. So we'll come back to you under unfinished business. Thank you very much, everybody, including Mr. Fellers and State's Attorney. Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask Mr. Fellows, where did you find that in the Robert Rules of Order?
2011, page 333.
333?
Yes, it's under the reconsideration, and it's the motion to reconsider and enter on the minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Red. My goodness. With that, I'm going to go back to Mr. Booker for our next item. Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Our next item is a resolution authorizing the chairman of the county board to execute an agreement with Rosecrans Incorporated for the jail alternative treatment program.
We got a motion by Mr. Booker on the resolution related to the agreement with Rosecrans for the jail alternative treatment program. May I have a second, please? Mr. Westcott, thank you very much. Item is now before the board for discussion and questions. Any questions or discussion by board? Yes, sir, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to make a motion to lay this item over.
We have a motion by Mr. McDonald to lay over the Rosecrans agreement. May I have a second? I see two hands. Mr. Schultz and Mr. Boomer are second the motion to lay over. The motion to lay over is now before the board for discussion. Any discussion or questions on the motion to lay over? Yes, sir, Ms. Fellers.
Thank you. If you don't mind, Mr. McDonald, is there a reason for laying this over?
Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, for $196,000, I want to make sure, there's no doubt that there's a need for the alternative treatment program in the jail. I just want to make sure that for $196,000, we are getting what we paid for. We're getting all the services that we're entitled with this agreement. and make sure that the inmates really are taken care of the best way possible.
The motion is to lay over. A yes vote would lay it over, a no vote would leave it here for action this evening. Any other discussion or questions by board members on the Rosecrans agreement? Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to call the roll. A yes vote does lay it over, a no vote keeps it here. Clerk Gummow.
Mr. Schultz? Yes. Mr. Tassoni?
Yes.
Mr. Westcott?
Yes.
Mr. Billich?
Yes.
Mr. Booker?
Yes.
Mr. Boomer? Mr. Butita?
Yes.
Mrs. Crosby? Mr. Fellers?
Yes.
Mr. Fiducia?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman is gone. Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. McDonald?
Yes.
Mr. Neighbors? Mrs. Red? Mr. Salgado? Unanimous of members present.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. And I will be making contact with Chief Saganek, Superintendent Redmond, and the Sheriff to address our concerns, our questions with this contract with Rosecrans. Thank you. Chairman, there's one question by a board member.
Yes, Mr. Boomer.
Yeah, just, did Mr. Kurlinkus did any more towards Mr. Fellers? Is there any, has he still got grounds to not vote on it?
Yes, Marilyn.
Hold on, point of order, we're still on a main motion here regarding, oh, no, sorry, my bad, my side.
So I'll go to the state's attorney.
Mr. Kurlinkus and I did look it up in Robert's Rules of Order. The motion to reconsider is debatable if the original motion was debatable. That's what the rules
So
say.
the motion to reconsider is, but not the enter on the minutes, is the motion is second, it's all it requires. I can argue with this because I know the rule.
So do I, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you very much. Mr. Boomer, I'll come back to you.
So I think we need to vote on it.
The debatable, so the motion and the second is what you're calling into question. So that you're saying that we would need to take a vote, or just is debatable.
But what you're saying is correct, however, the motion to reconsider will come at the next meeting, not at this meeting. That is why it was entered on the minutes.
Made the motion to reconsider, it was seconded, it was made at this meeting.
No, right, I made a motion to reconsider and enter on the minutes. That moves the reconsideration to the next board meeting.
The motion was made at this meeting. It is debatable.
And let me drill down to understand your point, Dave, is that by being debatable, meaning it's something we can discuss,
Yes.
and then after the discussion, is there a vote or is there not a vote?
Mr. Fellers is correct.
Okay, so we can come back under unfinished business. We will get our last committee item out of the way, just to get our committee reports done. And then if there are comments related to debate of this issue that people want to enter into the record, I was going to go back to Mr. Tassoni under that anyway, but we'll come back for for discussion at that time. And thank you, everybody, for the discussion to clarify that. Yes, sir, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have one more item that's not on the agenda, and I just wanted to inform the board that I met with Chief Deputy Saganek, Chief Carner, and Superintendent Bob Redmond this afternoon at the Sheriff's Department. They wanted to discuss with me the results of a independent study that was suggested by board member Mr. Arena some months ago. Therefore, the Sheriff's Department did hire a company to perform an independent study paid for out of the commissary funds to conduct a study on staffing. And The results are extensive. I'm not going to go over them, all of them. Just want to let you know that the board did authorize jail staffing to be at 159. As of Tuesday, they will swear in their 159 member. Who knows how much longer after that that we lose 1, 2, 3, 5. But as of Tuesday, we'll be at that staffing level that the board authorized. The independent study found that jail staffing level should be at 209. Chief Deputy advised that they can get by with 159, what we've authorized. It'll be bare bones, but we can get by with it. But again, the study found that we should be at 209. A couple other things. In 12 years, we have the Sheriff's Department has 100 less employees right now than we did 12 years ago. Crime is still climbing or hopefully leveling out at some point, but just wanted to pass that on to you. Every now and then, you get board members saying, why are we just now finding out about this? We've got, we'll be discussing budgets, department budgets within the next 5-6 months. So I'm going to do the best I can, as long as I'm chairman of the Public Safety Committee, to keep you apprised of where the Sheriff's Department's at, where the State's Attorney's Office is at, the Public Defender's Office, so that we will be prepared and, again, knowledgeable of where we stand when it comes time for budgets. But, let's see.
May I ask a follow-up to that, Mr. Booker?
Yes,
Do
sir.
you have, or is it available for dissemination or review? I'd be curious to read that now that it's been shared publicly, or just the fact there was a study, there were some findings. Is that something we can get copies of, or the executive summary of, or something?
Eventually, Chief Saganek is here. For those of you that don't know, Chief Deputy Saganek is here. He's just joined the our County Sheriff's Department. He's retired from the Elgin Police Department, brings a wealth of knowledge and experience with him. Number 2 in charge, Chief Carner is still with the Sheriff's Department. He's now in charge of civil processes. But Chief, would you be able to stand up and answer the chairman's question on as far as copies, getting copies? We looked at the copies today. I asked if I could take my copy with me. At the time, they requested that they keep those copies, that they would eventually get those copies out to us. So, Chief, if you could elaborate on that.
Sure, and thank you for allowing me to address the board. So yes, eventually I will consult with the sheriff, but eventually it will be available.
Is there a little bit, and first of all, welcome, and I've heard great things about you, so thank you very much for being here, but eventually, as in like a week or two, or eventually like a month or two?
It won't take a month, but again, I just want to consult with the sheriff, but it will be made available to the board.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief. Any other, or anything else, Mr. Booker?
Yes, there's just one thing that really caught my eye. It's just one quick paragraph, and then I'll be finished. One quick paragraph. It's an observation by this independent study, and it says, upon observation and consideration, we believe that the Winnebago County Jail is a facility on edge. Winnebago County Jail has great administration, supervisors, and officers, all of whom are doing their best to do a good job. But they all know that despite their best efforts, they may not be able to save the facility. That's just one paragraph of the study. So again, we're going to take steps. I'm going to keep you apprised of where we're going, what we need to do when it comes time to discuss budgets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Booker. I would only say you certainly shared a mouthful, but it's hard to react to a snippet when there's obviously contextual pieces that I look forward to reading when we get the report, hopefully very soon. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's just an eye-opener. Thank you, Chairman.
Next item of business, Personnel Policy Committee. Mr. Fiducia. Thank you, Chief.
be as long. We have 3 resolutions for personnel and policies. First resolution is a resolution authorizing the agreement between Gallagher Services and Benefits due to a name change, and I so move.
We got a motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution authorizing the agreement with Gallagher Benefit Services, Inc. for benefits consulting services due to the name change of the vendor. A second by Mr. Boomer. Thank you. And Mrs. Redd. Thank you. Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second resolution is the same, except it's the welfare and benefits plan, and that's due to a name change, and I so move.
Similarly, we got a resolution by Mr. Fiducia on the business associate agreement with Gallagher Benefit Services for the group health and welfare plans due to name change of vendor. Second, may I please have a second? Thank you, Mrs. Crosby and Mrs. Redd. Thank you. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the last resolution is a resolution authorizing the county board to execute an amendment to an agreement for linen laundry services at River Bluff Nursing Home, and I so move.
Motion by Mr. Fiducia on the resolution authorizing the chairman regarding the amendment to the agreement for linen and laundry services at River Bluff Nursing Home. May I have a second? Thank you, Mrs. Redd. Item is now before the board for discussion. If it's okay, could I just get a quick 30-second update of what occurred here?
I'll defer that to Mr. Chapman.
Okay.
I'll defer that to Ms. Johns. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Ken?
Thank you, Chairman. 2 years ago, we went out for bid, and this is a different type of service than we've ever used before. In this case, the companies locked us in. It was chosen to lock in. There's a maximum fee, so we never pay more than $430,000 for all the linens we need, and it's everything, because we don't own any linens. Everything is owned by the company. So anyway, what happened is they're in Cook County, so our linens go all the way to Cook County. They've had an increase from $10 an hour to now $13 an hour minimum wage increase. So their laborers have had this huge labor increase. So that's why we have to give them a one-time little extra to cover labor. Otherwise, they're going to cancel on us. And there's no way we have a secondary service to go with. And even when we did bid this, I even went back and looked at what we bid last time 2 years ago. So even the second place bidder was more expensive than even this new increase. And also they're allowed the CPI increase, and so that was also built in there.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Any questions or comments? Yes, Mrs. Redd.
Thank you, Chairman. This is just a thought. I would like to see the county do our own facility. That possibly could be, I know it could be jobs for people. Our prisoners maybe could work in the laundry. We could do our own, and maybe some of the hotels and hospitals around here. Just a thought.
So just so I'm clear, is although there's going to be a need, and while we review something, your request is to review the viability of if something like that would work for Winnebago County government?
Yes.
Okay. So separate, that would be a separate review process we'd ask somebody to look into while this moves forward, because we'll continue to need service in the interim. Is that meeting everybody? Okay. Thank you very much, Mrs. Redd. Any other discussion by board members? Okay, thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Fiducia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Due to Mr. Hoffman's absence, I'll waive animal stories for next week. And could we please fix Mr. Kalinkas' chair, because it's driving me crazy. That concludes the report.
Thank you, Mr. Fiducia. Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster is not here. Is there any item? There's no action items, so Mr. Schultz, you had anything to add, sir?
Yeah, he just asked me to indicate that there's no report tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schultz. Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No report this evening, but I anticipate having a meeting Tuesday, the 18th of this month. Thank you.
Tuesday, the 18th. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Unfinished business. We'll come back, and since the topic was about the dispensary discussion, we'll go to Mr. Tassoni for anybody that has comments, debate related to that item. Although we do not take action, is my understanding at this point. Anybody who wants to be on record with thoughts on that matter, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my comments are not specific to the ordinance prohibiting the establishment of a cannabis dispensary, but my comments are more of the nature of, I've attended over 300 board meetings over the past 12 years, and not once have I ever passed on a vote. I knew what my vote was going to be, pro or con, when it came to my turn. I take offense at those that would lean on one side or the other to be descending or ascending based on what the outcome might be. You know, I heard a comment that in this particular vote, there was a large number of board members that weren't present. 25% out of 20, it's not large to me. I think it's a bad deal when someone would dig deep inside of some Robert's rules on page 300 and something just to point out something, because they, in my opinion, they're just a sore loser. And I would encourage all those that voted in favor of not passing this resolution to stick to your guns, vote the same way next time, and when those other 5 members are here, I would encourage them to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Any other debate or questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on from that, the debate on that particular topic. Any other unfinished business? With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Boomer on the motion. May I have a second? Mr. Fellers on the second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much. Have a great night.